There's an old joke to to the timeless question of what do you get when you cross a Jehovah's Witness and a Unitarian Universalist answers someone who knocks on your door for no apparent reason. I'll admit that I've never really cared for this joke. I mean, I chuckled the first 78 times I heard it. But I don't particularly care for the way that it pokes fun at Jehovah's Witnesses, or for that matter, for the way that it pokes fun at us. It's not that I lack a sense of humor. I actually think it's a healthy thing to be able to laugh at ourselves. It helps people keep from taking ourselves too seriously, which is something that actually most every religion in the world could benefit from. Jokes that work well, though, have at least some kernel of truth to them, and this one may just have a bit too much for my taste. That's because it pokes at the reality that with few notable exceptions, we UUs are very reluctant promoters of our faith. And that, even if we were to knock at the proverbial door and it were to open, we wouldn't necessarily feel moved to say much of anything. Oh, so sorry to bother you. Don't mind me, I was just making sure your doorbell works. What is that? Why am I here? Well, it's not under any circumstances to talk about religion. So what's really going on here? Where does this deep-seated aversion to telling others about Unitarian Universalism come from? The prevailing theory is that with some 90% of us having roots in other religious traditions or no tradition at all, we've brought with us some unresolved baggage about our earlier experiences of religion. Sometimes among us, it shows up as anger or embarrassment, shame or disdain, or as misplaced arrogance, complete with a tidy sense of UU superiority. Of course, many of us have been abused by religion and have the scars to show for it. Others of us simply drifted away due to disillusionment or a process of deconstructing our former faith that in the end left us with little to hold on to. The net outcome of all of this, in my experience, seems to be that many, if not most UUs, get a wee bit anxious when others publicly promote their faith, and especially when that promotion turns to proselytizing with the unabashed goal of saving souls. There are understandable reasons why this might make us queasy. The religious zeal required to knock on door after door, facing hostility and rejection, can be off-putting. In this tradition, which teaches us to cherish our doubts, we are inclined to be at least somewhat skeptical of such true believers. I mean, how can anyone be so convinced that they're right? It also must be said that we live in a seemingly secular age. A few years ago, for reasons that are hard to explain, I was backstage at the taping of Canada's Got Talent. I ended up spending a couple of hours in a tiny green room with Martin Short and the opera singer Misha Bruegger-Gossman. Let's just say that there was a lot of personality packed into that small room. Wonderful personality, but a lot of it. At one point in this small gathering, I found myself in an awkward conversation with a woman, a Toronto socialite, who asked what I do. There was that temptation every minister faces in such moments, the desperate pull to explain that I work as a writer or a tattoo artist. Anything to avoid the buzzkill by introducing myself as a member of the clergy. But I told the truth, and as often happens, the woman recoiled and let out a little incredulous gasp, as if to say, does anyone still do that? As she shook her head from side to side, she said, you know, my husband and I must know 50 couples in this city, and I can't think of a single one of them that goes to church. I had no problem believing her. We live in secular times. Or at least we've lived in a space where we've largely agreed to keep our faith to ourselves. But this is changing. A few years ago, I heard Paul Bramadat, a UU and a professor of religion at the University of Victoria, describe how Canadian society is moving out of the pact that had been tacitly made as part of the Trudeau-era multiculturalism. The idea that all are free to practice their religion, whatever it might be, but that religion is expected to remain in the private sphere, a matter of personal or even private concern. But as he pointed out, that pact is no longer holding in the way that it once did, as our country's growing religious diversity sometimes leads to disputes, debates over whether women in Quebec have a right to wear a niqab, or around how sex education is taught in Ontario schools, or just in the last month, whether grade 8 students in the Woodstock Catholic School Board can be compelled to make anti-abortion posters as part of a contest, complete with a cash prize from an outside organization. Bramadat's point when it comes to discussing religion in Canada is that the era of don't ask, don't tell is coming to an end. And so the question for us is whether we are ready for it, whether we are willing and able to live out our faith more openly, whether we are ready to let our values guide our actions and to let our actions reveal what we truly believe. A few weeks ago, while on sabbatical, I was in, of all places, the Ozark Mountains in the northwest corner of Arkansas. I was on a solo road trip with a different destination, but I decided to make a detour to the town of Bentonville. Anyone ever heard of it? I'd been very curious about Crystal Bridges, the world-class art museum built there a few years ago by the Walton family of Walmart fame, or Walmart infamy. The museum hosts a truly stunning collection of art, showing what money can do, all in a beautiful building designed by Moshe Safdie, the Israeli-Canadian-American architect. Toward the end of my visit, I took in a powerful special exhibit that had just opened called The Dirty South, which explores the art and musical traditions of Southern Black culture over the past century. Early on in the exhibit, I was in a room with a very friendly guard who, in true Southern style, couldn't quite keep himself from engaging in conversation with almost every person who walked by. I was a bit distracted by his yammering, and I found it a little irritating as I was trying to read the artist statements. But when I started listening to what he was actually saying to people, I was immediately horrified. In an exhibit examining the legacy of slavery and the resilience of Black culture in the face of ongoing racial injustice, the friendly white guard was making lighthearted comments about one of the pieces of art, a piece that was itself a symbol of protest over the appalling conditions in which so many Black people lived during the Jim Crow era. I was flabbergasted. And just at the point when I wondered if I was misunderstanding what was being said, I caught the eye of the young Black woman he was speaking to. There was a quick moment of agreement between us that this was not okay. And I knew in that moment that the burden was on me to do something about what I was witnessing. I needed to show up as an ally. I opted against speaking directly to the man. To my mind, this was a systemic issue, something the museum needed to address more broadly. I didn't want him to be reprimanded or fired. I instead wanted him and anyone working in the museum to be asked to think about the deeper meaning of the art around them, to be invited to reflect on how their words and actions might affect those visiting the museum, and especially when going through an exhibit focused on the ongoing work of racial justice. And more than anything, and at the very least, I just wanted him to stop making the same harmful joke to others who happened by. But I had absolutely no idea where to start, no idea how to make a meaningful difference in the situation. That is, until I wandered into the gift shop just as I was leaving. That is when I spotted Hannah, an employee in the shop. Hannah was young and tall and regal with a swirling head of red hair. And Hannah was wearing 2 buttons. One said, "Ask me about my pronouns." The other was a progress flag, the recent update to the rainbow pride flag that includes now a brown stripe and a black stripe to be intentionally inclusive of Indigenous, Black, and people of color, and at the top, a chevron formed from the white, light blue, and light pink colors of the trans flag. When the progress flag first emerged a few years ago, I found it aesthetically jarring, and I quarreled with myself about whether the symbol itself was straining under the pressure of trying to convey too much. Though I had already moved well past that academic argument, in that moment there at the museum, I came to appreciate the symbolic power of this new flag for all that it meant. Those buttons gave me the confidence that I could speak to Hannah and that they would know who I should speak to. So I said hello to Hannah and thanked them for wearing their buttons. I can't imagine that it is easy to be a beacon of queer visibility in Northwest rural Arkansas. And then I said to them that their buttons, which to me pointed to an awareness of intersectionality, an awareness of how different oppressions can be linked, made me believe that they could be of help. So I explained the situation. Hannah took it all in. I asked who I should talk to, and Hannah gave me a name. And then I asked, will this person truly understand what I'm getting at? And Hannah promised me they would, and they did. I sat in the foyer of the museum past closing time, typing out a long email on my phone, and I received within an hour the most thoughtful response I could possibly hope for from the director of museum operations, indicating immediate steps to address my concerns at a high level, but all with a goal of growth and deeper understanding. I'll say that that afternoon was a moment of putting my own faith into action in some small way. Our commitments to racial justice as Unitarian Universalist have deep roots in my heart, to the point that I can't let moments like that pass by without comment. But what I want you to hear in this story is that it was Hannah who is the hero. Hannah's courage to wear their values literally on their lapel gave me the courage to ask for help when I needed it. As I drove on that evening, I thought about how the symbol of our flaming chalice came about during World War II as a way for people who were helping to move children fleeing persecution to safety so they could easily recognize one another as trustworthy. The first chalices were not 3D, they were 2D, two-dimensional images worn as lapel pins, an indication to others in the know that they were part of a network of people involved in this great effort to save and to serve life. That's what Hannah's buttons did for me. They told me that I could trust them. I have no idea if Hannah is a Unitarian Universalist. They felt to me, though, to have a lot in common with many of the UU young adults I have known through the years. Either way, Hannah was living their values out loud. And because they did, something may have been changed for the good that day. In this age of anxiety in which we are living, I dare say we need more of us to be living our values out loud. I want to be more like Hannah, and I want all of us to be more like Hannah, putting it out there, not proselytizing per se, but living in such a way that our actions reveal the values we hold and the faith that we profess. Be it in what we post online, how we move through the world, and how we are with strangers or our nearest and dearest. This is the path, I believe, to evangelism for Unitarian Universalists. Evangelism is a wounded word, but in its most basic definition, it means to share good news. So I challenge you to spend time in the coming days reflecting on what good news you have to share. It's not so much because you may find yourself a UU knocking on random doors, but because it's more likely that moments of opportunity will come knocking on your door if you're paying attention. Moments when the values you live by may make a real difference to someone else. Moments when the reason for sharing good news becomes truly and abundantly apparent.